All right, welcome to Rats in Boilersuits, episode 3. My name is Steph. I'm here with Kim. We watch Torchwood, so you don't have to.
But we'd like it if you also did.
Yeah, we really recommend it. And this week we are talking about episode 3, which I unkindly think of as the first good one.
I do as well. I was going to say, I think I mentioned to you
Excellent.
before, Steph, that when I recommend Torchwood to people, I say, don't make judgments till episode 5. You're not allowed. But I forget that they always watch episode 1 and 2 and they're like, I don't know if I like this. And I'm like, wait. Episode 3, they're like, oh, okay. And then they just have to put up with another one before it gets good. But yeah, I agree.
So we should start by giving a quick recap. Actually, before that, we should probably mention that Torchwood is often quite adult in its material. It is particularly dark at times in this week's episode. There is violence in this episode, particularly of a sexual nature, so we should probably flag that up before we start. Mm-hmm. But do you want to give a recap of what happens in this episode?
Sure. So, in this episode of Torchwood, the team are chasing down somebody who is emanating an alien signal that their equipment is picking up. Eventually, they find out what that was by getting his jacket off him, and it's a machine that does strange things and makes people see things that aren't necessarily there. So the episode is them finding out where it came from, what it does, and investigating around that. One thing I did notice that I completely forgot, because I forget how old this show is now, is that the haze wasn't pedestrianised properly yet. It was still a roundabout, like by borders and stuff. St. David's 2 didn't exist. Madness.
Yeah, it's so strange how much Cardiff has changed. And the weird thing is, partly Cardiff has changed because of the kind of investment that came with increased attention on Cardiff through TV shows like Torchwood. So it's weird that this TV show is part of the reason it's dated so badly. I have to say, from the start, this episode is so good. Mm-hmm. We've made fun of Torchwood a lot for just being very amateurish and terrible so far. But here, the opening is so exciting. They are running. So we have Gwen and Owen running through Cardiff, through the city centre. Very recognisable bits of Cardiff. We have Jack driving his ridiculous car. We have Tosh back in the hub, directing them, watching them on CCTV, telling them where to go. And the music, huge shout out to the music here. So I know for a fact this is Ben Foster's work, this particular piece of music.
This one's called The Chase, I think, isn't it?
It's called The Chase. I didn't know that. I think of it as the 456 music. Oh, so good. I didn't realise this piece of music turned up in Torchwood so early because I think of it so much as part of Series 3. But here it is, fully formed, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, it's so good. The only reason I know the track name is because it was the first piece of Torchwood music that I purchased on iTunes for 99p, and I bought like 3 of the tracks, and that one was my favourite. The Chase and The Woman on the Roof, I think, are 2 really, really nice ones. Very different, but yeah, straight in there. Great scene. They're running through town, chasing this alien signal that they have, and they don't know what it is yet, but they know that it's coming from this guy, so they're all chasing him. Gwen manages to be ahead of the others. She runs through one of the arcades just as the gate thing is closing, and she manages to go under it, but Owen and Jack get held behind. So the chase continues. Gwen follows him to the train station. She tries to grab him to catch him, but his hoodie rips off and he manages to get away. Tosh is like, well, whatever it was, the signal's right on you now. So she looks in the pocket of the jacket and there is this device that starts to light up. And clearly has a drawer that we don't understand, because why else would they keep doing it?
Yeah, so this is the ghost machine, which the episode is named after. The way the machine works is it's reasonably clear. I think they could do a good job of explaining it. But it's not always active. You can't just press it whenever. But occasionally there are certain spots, certain places in the city where it will activate. You can press a button and it gives you a weird empathetic vision. You sort of witness something, but more importantly, you feel the feelings of the thing that you're witnessing. But at this point, we don't know any of that. All we know is that Gwen has got this machine, presses a button, and sees a little boy dressed like a kid from the 40s turning up lost in the train station.
Yeah.
And she also feels really lost and scared. And then she snaps out of it when Owen and Jack catch up to her, and there's no sign of the kid anywhere.
Mm-hmm. You know the lines that stick with you for no reason? Whenever I'm out and tired, my brain is just like, I want to go home. Just that little loop in my head of Tom Erasmus Flanagan.
I really like this moment, because he's there with his card that his name is written on. He's got his suitcase. He's holding a teddy bear, which I found a bit much, but fair enough. Either way, I think something that is really shocking is the idea that loads of people were moved out of London in particular and came to Wales. Mm-hmm. All these children. And I think when I first watched this episode, I was a bit younger, and I watched it without really feeling the emotion of it. When I watched it this time, and maybe it's because I'm a bit older, so and I'm at the age where all my friends and family are having kids, so I'm sort of maybe a bit more sensitive to like an upset child.
Yeah.
But I really felt like the emotion of like a kid being out of his depth because, sorry, you've got to go away because there's a war on, and you're just sending a child away and never seeing them again. And I think this is something that sci-fi can do quite well, where it can show you something that, you know, a piece of history you probably learnt in school, but really make you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that scene.
Yeah, that's what I like the most about Doctor Who episodes, that time travel ones. People say they're the most boring ones. A lot of people only like the proper sci-fi ones, but I love taking like a historic event that we know happened and completely humanizing it, meeting the characters and seeing the environment and stuff. I really like those ones.
I agree. So we're back at the hub, and we're finding out about the machine. We see the CCTV, and it turns out that what Gwen saw was only in her head. There's nothing is happening in the real world. The machine helps you feel a feeling and see a thing, but there's no footage of it. So they're trying to work out two things. They're trying to work out, I think this is the interesting thing, is what they're mainly doing is trying to work out what's up with this machine and what's up with the guy who had it.
Yeah.
Because that's Torchwood's remit. So Gwen is really interested in this lost child, but that's a means to an end.
Yeah.
It's just to help them investigate the alien machine case.
Yeah.
But it's still quite fun seeing the investigation, and I think that's something this episode does as well. They follow a whole bunch of leads. They're trying to find the guy, they're trying to investigate the machine, and they're investigating the vision that Gwen has had.
Yeah.
So they've got three different ways of looking into it. They've got the name because Gwen saw it on the card. He's called Thomas Erasmus Flanagan. And there's a running joke here. I don't know how I feel about it. Where Tosh will be like, okay, I'm going to use all our alien tech to try and find it. And Owen's like, I've already found it. I just used the phone book.
Yeah, well, that was like, because that was Yanto before, wasn't it? Yanto was like, I could check with my eyes.
Yes.
It's almost like it becomes Torchwood just mocking itself. Like they see how incompetent they are. And I'm not sure if I'm comfortable sitting in between both worlds where Torchwood is good but also terrible, and the characters kind of know about it. I don't really know how to interpret anything that's happening.
Because my reading here is that Owen is making fun of Tosh for relying on her stupid old sophisticated modern technology when you can look in the phone book, which incidentally has not dated well.
Yeah, and also like Owen, he does it so quickly. But it will always take me long enough to flick through the really thin pages. I don't know how he did it. It's not realistic. They don't like flip open like normal books. So checkmate, Owen.
It's also extraordinary that this is not the only time Owen uses a phone book in this episode.
Yeah, true. It's just ready for him there. Why is the phone book in the autopsy room?
Yeah.
What was he doing?
And then later I think he's in his own flat. So Owen just has a phone book wherever he's going to be.
Bloody loves a phone book.
Loves a phone book.
Yeah, we're building his character up.
He has an interesting thing, though, I think, is that... So I think this is a very witty script. There's a lot of jokes in it. This is Helen Rayner writing this, who I believe was the script editor on Doctor Who for, I want to say, all of the Russell T Davies years. Mm-hmm. I feel like she's really got the rhythm of the dialogue really, really well. I think she's a very witty, funny writer. But what's interesting here is the line, he's in the phone book, is like obviously like a joke, like a punchline. But Bern Gorman who plays Owen, he doesn't play it like a joke. He plays like he's being a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
Which I think is good acting from Gorman because, after all, this is the same guy who was appalling last episode.
Yeah.
So I think Bern Gorman's got the measure of this guy, that he's like, he's not witty. He's just always like slightly smug and a bit snide. Yeah,
he's not trying to make people laugh. He's trying to outdo them.
Yeah.
Just before we get into the real flesh of the episode, you said before that one of the things you like the most about Torchwood is the fashion. Like it's the fashion of normal people, but it's also very specific to character. And I don't think I would have noticed this had it not been for you saying that. But what t-shirt was Gwen wearing? Like, it was just like something of like the teenager's rack of H&M or something. It was very strange. And I wouldn't have picked up on it if it wasn't for your comments on the fashion. And now I completely disagree with you.
But I think it's really characterful. I mean, it's a ridiculous t-shirt, but I also think it's a thing with Gwen where she's younger than she feels. I think because we see her, she's a police officer who's gone into this job, she can feel like a bit of a grown-up. So you almost have to remind yourself that, she's in her 20s, she's just moved in with a boyfriend, probably in the last handful of years.
Yeah, true. How old are the characters in this? They're very young.
About 25,
yeah. She's my age. That's mad.
Weird.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't run like that. That's a lot of, that's the first thing I think whenever I see a chase scene. I'm like, oh yeah, high energy. But then I arrived at an airport 20 minutes before my flight before, and I really thought the adrenaline could carry me to the gate, but I just cannot run further than that. That police training has done her fucking well.
Yeah. Before I got my act together, the number of times I was late to catch a train to a gig, and I'd have to run the end of it.
Yeah.
And just 5 minutes of running to get to a train would ruin the next hour of my train journey to wherever I was going.
Especially because when you get on the train or on the plane, particularly a plane, like there's no room for sweating and cooling down. You're just like, horrible. Anyway, once we've dealt with our own traumas about running.
So I think they are very young. I think that, and they're in their mid-20s generally, probably at the oldest. And I think Owen, Tosh, Gwen, and Yanto are all roughly the same age.
Yeah, it's just weird. It's like I remember when I was a kid, it was a weird moment for me to be 19 because that's how old Rose Tyler was.
Yeah.
And now I'm going through that again, but many, many years later.
Yeah. I think I'm not far off being the same age as Homer Simpson. Which is going to be a very upsetting
episode of Torchwood.
Okay, so next thing that happens is they go and visit Thomas Erasmus Flanagan, and this again is something that this episode does brilliantly. They go to the house, and it is such an ordinary. They're in Boottown, I think.
Yeah.
Which is an area I know really, really well, and the architecture of the houses. It's still really exciting seeing a proper TV show set in a city I know so well.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's like watching this huge investigation go on in the house of everyone I've ever known, effectively. Like, every house I've ever lived in. And I also really like, it's not a way that they would have done investigations before, obviously. We get that impression, and you feel that it's Gwen's edition that's done that. They're more on the ground now, which is especially nice because that's exactly her police training. And it's really nice then when they go to the door for her to get the opportunity to shit on Owen and be like, this is DS Harper. I really liked, having seen what happened in Gwen's first day, that she's already made enough of an effect on the way that they operate that they're on the ground and she's leading that area of it, which was really nice to see.
That's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you're right. And certainly what happens in this scene backs that up. I'll tell you my main takeaway from this scene. They go and visit Thomas's house. He is now probably in his 60s, maybe early 70s. Owen goes to talk to the daughter in the kitchen so that Gwen is able to talk to Thomas Erasmus. The main thing that I've taken away from this episode is that Owen watches Strictly.
And enough that he wanted to know who won.
Yeah. The daughter talks, I think it's some TV presenter, and Owen refers to her as having legs up to her armpits. And I've decided, I've got a reading that Owen is desperate to come across as like a lad and is terrible at it.
He's not interested in her legs, he's just interested in Strictly results, and he's just like,
because he watches it. If he was interested in seeing nice legs, I don't know if Strictly is the go-to lad's choice. We know he's single. I think he desperately wants to put forward this impression of himself as a very normal blokey bloke, straight heterosexual man, but really, we've seen his sex life, and now we know this. He's a bisexual man who likes threesomes and Strictly Come Dancing.
Is that a summary of you as well, Steph?
I'm not really into Strictly. So we get Gwen interviewing Thomas Erasmus. And again, I just think it's a really lovely moment. It's not particularly important to the plot what he says.
Yeah.
But it's one of my favourite moments in the scene, just this man explaining what it was like to come to Cardiff as a refugee.
Yeah.
And again, like I think again, the best bits of this episode are these like characterful moments where we get into the emotion, because I think television doesn't do inner emotion very well.
Yeah.
Books do. If you read a novel, you get inside the head of the character, but television can only show you what someone's doing, so it has to imply how they feel. Whereas this episode has this concept. The Ghost Machine is such a good concept for a TV show that I think you could make an entire series that is just about this machine.
Yeah.
Especially once we find out that there's a second half to the machine later and what that does. You could get 7 seasons out of that. You could have like an American network show, 24 episodes a year, from investigating crimes by finding emotional hotspots where strong emotions have been felt.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Like, right?
You should pitch that, Steph.
Maybe I will.
Yeah.
If Big Finish is watching.
Nobody listen. You're not allowed.
Yeah.
Take that.
Edit this out. I'm going to sit on that. So I love these moments. And I think it's almost a shame when it goes back to just being normal Torchwood.
Yeah.
Where it just has plot and there's an antagonist and they have to solve a mystery. Because this business is so much more exciting.
Yeah.
I'd almost prefer it if it was a murder mystery. So instead of knowing straight away who's committed a crime, all we know is how the victim felt, and there's just so much you could do with that concept.
Yeah. This you're like, oh yeah, I didn't like that it went back to being normal Torchwood. I'm like, do you know what this is, right? How many times are we going to encounter something where we're like, I hate the bit where Torchwood's a thing?
Yeah. I think almost all of Torchwood is at its best when it stops being Torchwood for a bit and has to do something else.
Yeah.
So we then get a scene of Rhys phoning Gwen.
Yeah, so they go outside, they conclude their investigation there. Gwen gets a phone call from Rhys, trying to ask her if she has any whites to go in the washing machine. I did really like, again, with how Rhys is always so, like, unexpectedly supportive of all of this new stuff. There's never, like, a level of resentment. And there's just a nice bit where he's like, oh, I don't mind you doing all the secret squirrel stuff. I can't remember what the exact line is, but he calls it secret squirrel stuff, which I really, really like.
Yeah, so funny. Like, is that a reference to anything? Like,
I don't know.
It's almost like there's a series called The Secret Squirrel Club, like a children's series of books or something. But
yeah, it's just
it's
just a really basic metaphor of her, like, carrying little nuts around, but it doesn't make any sense.
I think that's cute as well, that, like, you'd think that Rhys would resent being kept out of the secret, but as far as he's concerned, it's probably not that interesting.
Yeah, he's almost patronising it. He's like, oh, I know you got your little special ops, but can we still chat? But yeah, the phone call, it has those nice moments in it, but it turns into a bit of an argument. It's the wrong time for Gwen, and she kind of shouts at him a bit. She's like, I don't know if I'm coming home. And he's like, well, fine. I won't wait around for you then. I'm going to go around Dav's house. We see both of them being sad that it had turned that way. They're a bit like, oh, fuck's sake.
Yeah, it's interesting. The first crack that we see in the relationship is not the fact that she has this job, not the fact that she keeps busy hours. It's simply that she can't tell him for certain what time she'll be back or if she'll be back.
Yeah.
That's the line for Rhys.
And that's obviously quite a big obstacle to overcome. So they go back to the hub, and meanwhile, Tosh has been researching, based on the CCTV images, who the person that was carrying the ghost machine is. And they have found that his name is Sean Harris. As a nickname, Bernie. They have like a brief history of all the stuff he's flagged up to have done. Basically, a history of petty crime. I really like the one where they're like, oh, he was stealing tyres off someone's car. But then the owner turns up and gave him so much grief that he apologised and started putting them back on. And that's when the police turned up. I really like that one.
So funny. It's a really fun image of this guy. I think we immediately quite like this guy. Mm-hmm. He's someone who commits crimes, but he's clearly a bit of an idiot. And he's got a bit of a heart of gold and is just in a tough situation. Mm-hmm. I really like this scene. So we're in the hub and everyone's doing their own thing and it feels really natural. Yeah. And a lot of it calls back to the last episode. So once again, Yantos comes in with coffee. Jack's got some takeaway. Tosh is actually doing some work. Owen's messing about playing an old video game. But it's all happening all at once. Mm-hmm. So there's just this sense of, yeah, this is what they do. Sometimes they do just sit around, and right now only Tosh has work to do. Mm-hmm. So the others are just there kind of filling their time. And It really feels like a student flat in
It
some
does,
ways.
yeah. And it's back to that nice thing that Torchwood does where it really just feels like people. Like they're not sat at their desks doing that weird TV typing with weird shit coming up on the screen. They're just hanging out. Like it's just written realistically.
Yeah, the other thing that's a bit weird here is that Gwen's putting an investigation together and she's essentially doing like a police board. In fact, as soon as I've said it, I'm no longer annoyed about this because actually it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the point I was going to make is she doesn't have a corkboard or an easel or a whiteboard to write on. So she's having to stick Post-its directly onto a window.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched it, I thought, well, now it just feels like a set.
Sure.
Because realistically, if this was a real base, you'd have those things. But actually, no, we know that Gwen likes to investigate like a police officer. The others don't.
Yeah.
So actually, no, fair enough. They probably wouldn't have those resources yet because
that's true.
They've only just hired someone who can actually do an investigation.
Yeah. So during all this investigation, they've narrowed down to Bernie Harris. They know they need to find him, and Jack asks where he lives. Tosh says Splot, and then they all go Splot, as if they've never heard of it. Like, who the fuck lives in Cardiff and hasn't heard of Splot?
Yeah. When we first watched this, because Eleanor, my wife, is from Newport, she spent more time in Cardiff than me. So I just remember her really loving that line because, you know, she and her mates had a joke about Splot being a terrible name for a place.
Yeah.
And...
yeah, it's very funny. I lived in Splot for a year. Whenever I would have to tell anyone where I lived, they'd be like, are we saying that right? What? Splot is just a good word.
It's a great name.
I actually as well, I really liked how on topic, because anyone who lives in Cardiff will know that, of course, this stuff would be happening in Splot. It perfectly fits Splot. And I have a specific memory of why it perfectly fits Splot. When I lived in Splot for about a year, they were electrifying the railway, as they still are now, making their way through Cardiff. And there were massive pile driver noises in the night. And people were complaining about it. And I tweeted about it because I'm 60 years old. And then some journalism students came to speak to local residents about it, just so they could write a little report. And I agreed to be in it. So I'm being interviewed outside my house in Splot. So it's me and two people with a camera. And a woman walks past and she looks at the camera and she's like, oh, what's going on by here? And she's like, oh, what's all this then? What's the camera for? What are you guys doing? And they looked a bit like, oh, you know, who's she? But I was like, oh, we're just filming a little chat about all the noises that are happening in the night. You know, the noises in the night? And she was like, oh, yeah. Werewolves, is it? I was like, no, it's not werewolves. But then we were like, the two guys, they just didn't know what to make of her. And she just carried on walking. Like, she was like, yeah, gotcha. I know exactly what all this is about. And she walked away and I was like, why the fuck are you filming me? It was the single most Splot experience of my life. It was so good.
That is incredible. I love it. Also, that's my favourite genre of story, which is Welsh normality in extraordinary situations.
Which is why, as well, with local knowledge of Cardiff, yes, but Wales generally, in particular, just works perfectly for this type of sci-fi where you're trying to take bizarre things that are kind of a mix of fantasy and sci-fi and put them in normal everyday people's lives. Because the Welsh response to that type of thing is like, oh, yeah, werewolves. Gotcha. Like, there's such a blasé kind of attitude to anything strange in places like these, and that's why it works perfectly. Like, of course, people would see stuff flying through the rift and just pick it up and collect it. They'd be like, oh, that's interesting. No, just put that by here. But that's why this episode went up so far in my estimations when I rewatched it, because having lived in Splot, I'm like, yes, very realistic. It checks out.
Yeah, it feels really, really authentic. I mean, I don't know where Helen Rayner is from. I know that she is Welsh. But it feels so authentic. I'm like, it feels like she really knows her Cardiff.
Yeah.
It's not just, like, even the Russell T Davies episode, you know, again, Russell T Davies is Welsh. He has obviously lived in Cardiff, but this feels much more lived in. When we go to Boot Town or Splot, these really feel like living, breathing places.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's why it's a sudden favourite for us, because it brings us from the weirdness back home. it kind of grounds us for the next couple of episodes. So after we've assessed that Bernie lives in Splot, the team is sent to find Bernie in Splot, and they go to what they have down as his address, and they knock on the door, and Tosh is like, does Bernie live here or something? She tries to introduce herself to say she's from Torchwood and they're doing an investigation, and the woman cuts her off and be like, well, I'm his mother, and he's a robbing little bastard who's not getting a foot in this house until he pays me 50 quid or something. Tosh is very taken aback by this. Tosh is obviously not used to this kind of interaction, but Gwen is in the background as a police officer who just laughs because she's met so many people like this before. She knows the exact situation. And again, it was just really nice to see an episode where Gwen goes from being a catastrophic disaster to completely in her element with the type of investigation that they're doing. It was really nice.
Yeah, it's suddenly it's the rest of Torchwood who are a bit out of their depth. And I like that it feels like there's more respect for Gwen as well, and just because she's shown what she can do now and they realise, oh, this is a useful skill set.
Yeah.
So we go door to door. We then meet a whole bunch of other people whose opinions of Bernie is just to roll their eyes at the silly boy and his naughty ways.
Yeah, I like the one who's like, he said he'd give me an iPod, he never.
I smoke my fags.
So yeah, raving reviews from Bernie. The team, despite speaking to all these people who all know Bernie, he's infamous within Splot, cannot find him at all, and they completely fail their basic duty of finding a 19-year-old boy. But the one thing that I did think was very impressive was that Owen got 4 pasties for £1.
I know, right?
Where did he get that?
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, they're a terrible team, but that's a bargain.
Yeah. Torchwood discount.
Yeah. So they have completely failed their basic task of finding Bernie. Then Jack turns up because he's obviously left them to do the basic work. I really like this moment as well. It was the first time we've seen Jack talking to them like he's their boss, because you don't actually get many moments like that because they're such good friends. Jack suggests that one of them's going to have to use the machine again in the hopes that it could give them another clue. And then they're all like, well, that would be dangerous. And he's like, well, aren't you the guys who gave up looking for a teenager today? I thought you might be after something that a little bit more exciting. And he's quite stern and he's quite sarcastic. He's clearly genuinely angry at them, but he's not being unfair or cruel or anything. But it's really nice to see Jack behave like a boss.
Yeah, they start heading back. Owen now has the machine, and as they're walking under the bridge, the machine activates again, like it did for Gwen. He activates the machine, and what he witnesses is a teenage girl who went to a party, and she's had a bad time. There was a guy there, and he clearly got a bit pushy with her in his advances, and now she's upset and she's walking home. But Owen continues to watch and sees the guy that she was with at the party. He follows her. He turns up under the bridge and he's sort of taunting her. He's making fun of her for being upset. So it's this very horrible, sort of quite sadistic scene. They look like they're from the 50s. I think that was like he's got a bit of a teddy boy look.
Yeah.
So he's clearly coming after her to kiss her, but he's clearly not someone who's after intimacy.
Yeah.
He's getting off on the power of kissing someone who doesn't want to be kissed. And when she really starts to struggle and says, look, I've got to be home. I told my mother I'd be back by 9. He reveals that he has a knife. And we kind of look at Owen for most of his reaction, because the big thing here is that he isn't just witnessing this. He is feeling her emotions as well.
It sounds quite similar to in a dream, when someone enters a room in a dream and you don't just like you're not just interpreting things with your eyes. If someone walks in and they have a sinister intention, you feel it. You feel the emotions of spaces and stuff, and it seems quite connected to that sort of feeling. Like Owen is clearly overwhelmed by this sense of fear, and he's breathing heavily and he cannot move, but Byrne plays it really well. He's like completely like borderline panic attack, frozen, and he's gripping onto the machine harder and harder out of fear, and then he comes out of it.
It's possibly one of the best pieces of acting we've seen in the series so far, this moment. I think he really sells this person who is just paralyzed by adrenaline, which I think is a really hard thing to act and convey, but he just has this sort of shiver and this look on his face that really sells it.
Yeah.
I want to kind of stay on this moment for a bit, because we were talking 2 episodes ago, and because this was my reading when I first watched it, that the very difficult truth about Owen is that he is someone who behaves very poorly in the first episode, where he appears to solicit a threesome without the consent of the people, or at least with dubious consent. He has this sort of magic perfume that makes him irresistible. And I think that's a really, really hard thing to accept about Owen if you like the show and if you like the character. Even though it's never spelt out, for me, this moment is almost like a redemption, almost like he suddenly realizes what it's like to be powerless and for someone to just decide what they're going to do with you even without your permission. And even without that side of it, Owen so far has seemed to be quite cold and quite mean. And suddenly he has empathy forced on him. Mm-hmm. You know, he's not empathizing because he's thought about it. He's empathizing because he literally felt every single emotion that the person he witnessed. I think I'm more interested in him at this point. I still don't like Owen Harper, the person.
Yeah.
But I think this is a much more interesting character than the one we've seen so far.
Yeah,
who's
definitely.
Just got a chip on his shoulder and for no good reason. What happens next?
So the team see how terrified Owen is. They saw it lighting up, so they know that he's just had a similar experience to Gwen, and they take him back to the hub and they're all discussing it. When they find out what happened with the incident, because they find the old police report and they find out that Ed assaulted and killed Lizzie, Owen is like really dead set on finding out more information to prove that this happened. So they find the old case report of it. There were no witnesses and no one was brought to trial. And he initially seems really motivated to try and fix that and to get justice for what he just saw, which Jack has to very quickly shut down because that's not what Torchwood do. And also because Owen's like, well, I saw it. He's like, no, you didn't. You saw an echo of an emotion through time. That won't stand up in court.
Yeah, it's so great, this bit, because he's half detective who's become obsessed with a case, and he's half the spirit of the deceased, determined to get revenge.
Yeah, it gives us a good indication as to how affected by this Owen is, that he's already trying to do what he can to try and get justice for someone. It's also interesting that Jack thinks it's not even worth trying and it's not their place, when, as Andy said, it's all DNA these days. If they were to give an anonymous tip-off about who did it, then there would be DNA evidence on like the clothing that they took from Lizzie. And so it's not that out of the question to close this case for the sake of her family after all of this. And it is a bit unusually cold that they're not interested in doing that at all.
I don't think it's unusual for Torchwood cold. Because we have seen already, and maybe that's part of what, because I think this episode does a lot of work to explore nooks and crannies that the first two episodes left open. And I think one of the things it does explore is, okay, these people are really cold and detached. What would it take to make one of them snap and suddenly really care about a thing? So I think you're right, and I think we're meant to think about that. I think we're meant to be.
Yeah, I guess Jack doesn't want them getting concerned with individual issues, because the whole point of Torchwood is that they need to switch that off to be able to do what's the best for the planet.
That's it. If Torchwood was a crime-solving unit, it would never get around to investigating any alien stuff, because they'd be so much better at investigating a whole range of different crimes than the police force.
Yeah. So, while Owen's going through all of that, Jack is trying to work out what the machine was. They find out that it is a quantum transducer, which is a machine which turns one type of energy into another. Tosh is very excited about this. Jack explains that basically human emotion is energy. That energy gets stored in an environment and then kind of plays back.
Yeah. I think it's a really common thing, and it's the same as Jack has that line about the invisible lift in the first episode, which is like, I can say it's a quantum inducer, but Ghost Machine is cooler, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's got this thing where we're allowed to enjoy these like quite fantastic names for things, but we're assured that, don't worry, there is an explanation. Yeah. And what's the explanation? Some made-up gibberish. The examples he gives of emotions leaving ghosts, he gives 3 examples. One is Deja Vu. When you think you felt an emotion before, that's because that emotion is presumably left behind there. Yeah. Which, again, doesn't quite make sense to me, but...
Especially not with the other examples, no. But
yeah, because the other examples is feeling someone walk on your grave, and he's like, and that's because it's happened. Well, I mean, that's not how it works.
Yeah, that's not what we're explaining. You've just completely jumped topics.
The only one that makes sense is you think someone's behind you in an empty room.
Sure, they are. Someone is there. They always are.
Because they left an emotion. So that would make sense. Again, though, it's a great concept, and if this was a 24 episode American series about a ghost machine, there would be a Deja Vu episode. There would be an episode about someone walking over your grave. So he's really just rattling off concepts for other episodes you could do with this machine.
Yeah. So, Owen gets sent home because he's getting all swept up in wanting to get this man convicted. The others then leave, and Jack takes Gwen down to the spooky gun room that they apparently have to learn how to shoot a gun, which is where we get yet another example of the weird relationship between Jack and Gwen. Like, I'll take it at this point. Although I will say, like, he's her boss and he's teaching her to shoot a gun. And, like, it's a weird vibe.
It's really weird. I don't care for this scene.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be my first nomination for a Torchwood moment of the week.
Oh, yeah.
Because...
sexy gun training.
It's so stupid. It's absolutely ridiculous, this scene. Jack's behaviour is so inappropriate. Like, the brushing her hair back. He spends so long brushing her hair back.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessary. It's... don't get me wrong. She is rubbish at using the gun. The first thing she does once she's given a gun is point it directly at his face.
Yeah.
And, all right, we know he can't die, but...
Still not a pleasant experience, is it? No.
Right. I kind of liked the moment where he's like, okay, aim at the target. And she, first of all, aims it upwards and then brings it down because, like, that's what she's seen in films.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of... I bet this looks really weird if you're American because she's a police officer with no gun training.
Oh, yeah, true.
And even for me as a viewer, even though I know in the UK, police officers don't have guns except very specific and rare types of police officer. But even because I'm so used to watching American cop shows or just seeing any American show where a police officer turns up and can shoot, it's really surprising to see, she has no idea. She does not know her way around a gun at all.
Yeah.
But then the fact that they have a gun range and they've taken so long to teach her to shoot is weird.
Yeah.
Another thing that's weird is that they have two types of target to shoot at.
Right.
And they are of identical shapes and sizes. So there's no reason to have two types. One type would serve the job perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. Because what it is a humanoid shape with a target drawn on so that you know when you shoot them how close you got to the target. Yeah. Half of them, type 1, look like human beings. Look like men with guns to give you a sense of shooting at them. The other type look like weevils.
Yeah.
They have dedicated... rats in boiler suit targets. It's not going to help you. It's not going to benefit you. You can just use the normal human man ones, which means they have commissioned art, because it's not a photo.
No, it's not, is it?
An artist has produced these. We've seen no evidence that anyone in Torchwood... Have they gone to a professional artist?
I don't know.
Maybe
they just have a big printer.
Maybe they have a printer, but...
Maybe it was Susie.
Maybe Susie.
We don't know if
Susie.
she's a good artist. She was supposed to be good at everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very weird. And also, she doesn't practice with moving targets, does she? Just static weevils and man silhouettes.
Yeah. So it's a really basic... So loads of effort has gone into commissioning and designing weevil targets, but no effort has gone into... They don't even pop up, which I believe they do in a normal police sort of target range. It's just... This is why it's my Torchwood Moment of the Week nomination, is because they have put loads of effort into this gun range, and it has gone into the wrong things.
Yeah. Does
all
not
of
serve
that
its
effort,
purpose at all.
They are no better off. It hasn't helped them.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny. Jack is so inappropriate in the way he teaches her. She doesn't call him on it, but it's also... It's like it's meant to be a seduction, but we've not seen any evidence that they're falling in love or that there's a romantic spark between them.
Yeah, it's very odd. And again, I wonder if it was the direction of the episode.
Maybe.
It could have just been Jack was supposed to train her on guns and show her how to do it, and they're like, oh, how about you guys just like press up against each other really uncomfortably.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really strange. It's always annoyed me. Although it does have one of my favourite random lines that I always quote. I love the line where she's like, oh God, this is weird. Like, I don't even kill spiders in the bath. And Jack's like, neither do I. Not with a gun. I really like that.
It's so good.
That is a line that I think comes up most in my head when I count.
Yeah. Oh, we find out something else extraordinary here as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just read it as well. We find out a lie is what we find out, Steph. Just a big ass lie.
Yeah.
Gwen's about to go home. She's like, oh, Jack, when do you go home? And he's like, I don't. And she's like, oh, shit, man, you live here. That's mad. He's like, yeah. She's like, oh, but where do you sleep? And he's like, I don't. Which is not true. Because one, he's a human being. And two, we see his room in a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
Like, he's got a room under his office. He's got a little manhole. He climbs down. He's got a lovely bed.
What does he benefit from this lie? And it feels like so there's a weird amount of there's a lot of questions around whether the Doctor needs to sleep. I don't even know if that's true anymore, because I definitely think the Russell T Davies version of the show, that Doctor needs to sleep. Like, we see him book into hotel rooms and stuff. And I think maybe it's a common thing when you've got an alien, weird lead character that, maybe he doesn't even need to sleep. Like, that's an easy go, like, almost like trope of an alien character. And I could almost accept the idea that Jack, since being brought back, since he has this thing that keeps him permanently alive, maybe a side effect of that is that he doesn't need to sleep. But it's sort of thrown in there without any kind of... Like, what would that mean for a person to just be permanently not sleeping? If nothing else, what are you going to do with that time? Sure, and we know that he's obsessed with work. You'd almost expect that people would be like, Jack, you seem to do 3 times as much work as anyone else. How are you getting...
Yeah.
Oh, it's
maybe he just watches a lot of Netflix or something.
Yeah.
Although he can't, because it's 2006.
What's he doing?
Was Blockbuster still around then?
I guess it must be. I bet he's ordering it in the name of Torchwood.
Probably, yeah. But yeah, it's just bizarre because we see him sleeping later in the series, which means it's a decision, could have been a decision they made later, or it's just an outright lie, which has no purpose.
Yeah. I think it's probably an inconsistency. I don't think it's meant to be a lie.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying imagining that it is a lie. and they, just for no reason, Jack wanted to come off as more mysterious than he already is.
And also that Gwen accepts that, because I know it's weird that he can't die, but she doesn't bat an eyelid at it. Yeah. She's just like, he's like, I don't. She's like, oh, don't you get lonely? Like, just move it on. Because when she first met him, she saw him come back to life. So she is so gullible now. She will accept anything he tells her. And maybe that's why he's playing on it.
He also, when she says, like, what, oh, okay, how about this? I bet he doesn't need to sleep physically.
Okay.
But he can choose to if he wants to.
Yeah.
But currently he's choosing not to, because he's constantly alert, because we know that there is something he's waiting for, and he needs to be able to go at the drop of a hat. He is ready to do it, and we've seen more of the show, so we know what he's waiting for. But that is a character point that's already been made explicit for Jack.
It's just though, like, he's like, the 21st century is when everything changes. Like, that's 100 years, Jack.
Yeah.
Like, are you just going to not sleep at any point?
Yeah.
Maybe the other theory is that he does get tired and he needs to sleep, but he just shoots himself in the head and wakes up as a shortcut.
My God.
Just like, oh, okay.
That is the darkest interpretation of him not needing to sleep I can possibly imagine. I'm going to veto that because I don't want that to be true. That's deeply upsetting. So he lives in the hub, doesn't necessarily need to sleep, but maybe he's lying. And I don't know, I think there are so many things that make you human that Jack seems to have lost. And the danger is that Gwen is going to go the same route, that she's going to lose some of the things that make her human. And so the temptation is that she's losing her humanity and kind of attracted to Jack.
Yeah.
But again, that might be because we're still early on in the history of this show, and they hadn't quite worked out what they were doing with all these characters. But we then get to a scene where Gwen goes home. Reese isn't there. True to his word, he's gone out. She has an answer phone message from him, but it's quite a nice message, actually. He's sort of... He's not really apologising, because it's not his place to apologise, but he's showing that he understands that the job's important, and he's trying to be a bit more considerate of her needs.
Yeah.
And he's saying that he did put the laundry on, and he's still getting the boot in. He's still like, I did it, even though you were bloody grumpy, so,
Yeah, which I thought was really nice. It's like a good, that's how to diffuse an argument like that, when you know it was over something silly.
Yeah. And then there is a brilliant moment, and this, again, like all my favourite moments in this episode are when the machine gets used. Gwen uses the alien machine to see what strong emotions are in the flat, and all of the strong emotions are just love for really normal, silly stuff.
Yeah, it's so nice.
We get that scene of him dressing up for Gwen's mother's 60th, and she's insisted they're all smart, so he's having to wear a suit that he bought for an interview, and the zip's gone on it, and she's laughing and taking photos and him getting embarrassed.
And we get the scene of her having just qualified as a police officer, and he gives her a kiss and tells her how proud he is of her. It's just really, really nice. It's also, though, it's a bit fucking Torchwood that she just stole that machine, innit? Like, here we go again. Come on now.
Why has she brought that home?
Should we nominate that?
Yeah, that's... We've been... 2 episodes it took for her to become just as bad as the rest of them.
Yeah. She's not losing her humanity, but she is losing her sense.
So we're nominating that for Torchwood Moment of the Week.
Yeah.
Gwen takes Ghost Machine home. They still don't know.
Should you say it out loud like that? Just Gwen takes Ghost Machine home. Like, yes, don't do that. Hearing those words is enough for me to be like, bad idea.
That's the thing. Like if Reese got home and sort of... In fact, he does, because he arrives home and she has to quickly shove it in a bag.
Yeah. So Reese comes home because Dav and his wife had an argument and he didn't fancy sleeping on the sofa, so he came home.
Yeah.
And they have a little moment where they reconcile and everything's fine. It's
really nice as well that, like, you know, that we get the sense that Dav and his girlfriend have argued, and so Reese is just being like, okay, well, I'll leave then. And it's funny how Gwen and Reese should be having more relationship troubles than they are. It's showing, I think, that Gwen and Reese are particularly resilient. Like, it's unusual how well they get on. It's a really strong relationship at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's nice.
Although, one little point, though, is that what Reese says is they had an argument, which means he took the spare room and I didn't fancy the sofa. You didn't fancy the sofa? Why would you stay?
Maybe, I guess it's just because that sentence is just him. Really, he's saying, like, I wanted to come home. It could even be that the argument isn't even real. I think he's just being coy about it and being like, oh, well, yeah, I'm just here because I didn't fancy the sofa. Like, to kind of break the ice, because he's not brave enough to say, like, I wanted to come and see you because I don't like that we're fighting.
I think that's a really good point, actually. I believe that.
He might just be making it up.
Yeah, I think he is. He wanted to come home. He wanted the excuse.
So then they start kissing, and as you said, it's just out on the sofa. Like, Gwen's still holding this ghost machine that she nicked from work, and she has to, like, she's kissing him. She just tucks it into her bag. We don't know if it's dangerous still. A second ago, Jack was like, oh, we'll have to test the machine again. And everyone was like, that could be too dangerous. And then just by chance, Owen had an experience with it within a minute of that conversation happening. But they didn't confirm or deny whether or not it's dangerous. Like, we know it has this property, but it doesn't mean it's not going to hurt someone. Yeah. It's so weird.
So we're seeing 2 things at this point as well, because we're cutting between Gwen in her flat and with Owen.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is that while Gwen is struggling to feel the feelings of love, like that's because I think that's the idea, isn't it? She's using that machine to remind herself of the love that she felt. Actually, in that sense, the gun range scene is quite important, because that's the scene where it's clear that she's slightly getting lost in the moment and she almost forgot about Reese. And then she has this moment of snapping out of it and going, no, I have to go home. I really should be getting home.
Yeah.
And takes the machine with her because she needs to use alien technology to rekindle the emotion of love.
To be honest, if your relationship's at that stage, it might be time to bow out. But yeah, that does make sense, because then again, because we're early in Jack and Gwen's relationship, it would make sense that they might not be sure. And also, like, as much as we were like, Jack's being inappropriate, it's inappropriate because he's her boss. But within the context of these 2 characters, she's very much reciprocating. Yeah. Maybe it does make more sense that she has a flirt with Jack while learning to use a gun, and then is like, oh shit, I've got a boyfriend, let me rush home to him. And then you're right. That fits in.
Because she compartmentalizes a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think Gwen is a person who, when she's in Torchwood, she just completely forgets the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And needs to snap out of it.
Yeah, which is because I guess that happens to everyone, and that's specifically what Jack did not want to happen to her.
Yeah.
But so Owen, right? So Owen is researching and drinking is what we see in his flat.
So this is the interesting contrast. Gwen needs to steal a machine to feel emotion, whereas Owen, he can't get rid of the negative emotion that he felt, and so he's just in his flat finding it unbearable, drinking away the pain.
Yeah, it's getting light outside. Like, he stays up all night looking at this stuff, and I hadn't picked up on that before. So Owen clearly drinks and thinks about this all night, and then the next scene we see is him going to Ed Morgan's house to confront him, and it's morning, so he's just been going over this in his head for hours and hours and hours, and then exhausted and probably starting to get a hangover that's kicking in. He goes to Ed Morgan's house and pretends that he's investigating some gas issue. And then once he gets sat down inside with Ed, he starts kind of hinting to him that he knows something about his past. And Ed's getting more and more uncomfortable throughout all of this and eventually flips out.
Yeah, the guy playing Ed Morgan is really, really good, I think.
Yeah.
The guilt from the murder has clearly not sat well with him over the years. He's now a very paranoid man. He's agoraphobic. He's mostly keeping himself locked up in his house. We find out later that he's tried to take his own life a few times. He hasn't survived the guilt. So in some ways, he's a much more pathetic figure than the young guy we saw in The Vision. But there's a couple of lines here that suggests that he's still a pretty nasty piece of work. When he thinks this is about a gas leak, his assumption, Ed Morgan's assumption, is that the neighbour has dobbed him in and said she smells gas. And he's just got this furious line about how, oh, it's her next door, isn't it? She makes things up.
What I read from that was that because we later find out that Bernie's already been to his house, he is now so paranoid that everyone around him knows that he's just, everyone he meets, he's just, anyone that they might have interacted with, he's just trying to set up the idea that what they say might not be true.
That's interesting, yeah. We know he was paranoid anyway, but maybe he's far more paranoid since Bernie came to visit.
Yeah, but yeah, he shouts at Owen. He says, "I've told you before, you'll get nothing from me." So Owen's kicked out of the house, and then he turns around to walk back towards work, I assume, because it's light, it must be time for work, even though you've had no sleep, you idiot. And he sees a teenager, locks eyes with him, and in a split second realises that that is Bernie Harris, who they were looking for earlier, and starts chasing him. And then a very fun chase scene ensues.
I love this chase sequence. I had written down the phrase ridiculous chase, and then as I looked back to the screen from my note, it got far more ridiculous. Again, it comes back to what you were saying about how good it is to have a show set in Cardiff, because the Welsh response to things is so understated and so, like... Yeah, the woman who sees a chase coming through her garden, and all she does is lets the chaser know, yeah. You went that way.
Maybe she knows Bernie.
Oh, yeah.
He could be a well-travelled man.
It's just so funny. And I love the direction of it. I love... They run over a bridge I remember very well from... Is that Cathays? I think that might be.
I was going to say Cathays, yeah, I think so.
And that was an area I knew well when I first watched this, because that's where my student friends lived. So this was the first time that I felt, oh, this is the Cardiff I know.
Yeah.
And again, it's just not an obvious place to go filming, which again makes me think that this episode just uses locations really, really well.
Yeah, feels so Cardiff.
It's just great, this sequence. And I love going through people's back gardens as a concept as well, because I like getting a little glimpse of people's lives through the gardens they land in. It reminds me, there's, the episode Gridlock of Doctor Who, where big traffic jam full of flying cars and the Doctor passes through the cars and there's just a little tiny story for each person.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's got that little sort of observation of human life that's really nice.
Yeah, that's a good point. It puts us back into the fact that all of this is happening around the setting of normal people living their lives.
Yeah.
So Owen catches up with Bernie. Again, it drills in how pathetic he is, because he's like, "Oh, please don't hurt me, I got asthma." And Owen says, "I'm not going to hurt you, I'm going to bloody kill you." And then the next thing we see is them having a pint together. So it really wasn't hard to sway him, was it, after that? Although I noticed Bernie doesn't drink his the entire time. Maybe he's suspicious. But Owen's obviously contacted the rest of them and been like, "Hey, I found Bernie Harris." And then they all turn up. They don't yet seem to question how Owen found him. It's just not addressed, which is fine.
Yeah.
When they turn up, they look like they're about to, they look a bit policey, and he's a bit scared. Yeah. He's like, "Oh, look, if this is about the dodgy fags, honestly, it wasn't anything to do with me."
He's such a fun character. I could do with so much more of this guy.
Yeah, me too. He must have been really fun to play as well.
And he's really well played as well. He has that sort of slightly manic energy. He's not obvious casting for this character, I think. You almost expect the casting to be someone a bit more weedy and a bit more sort of sly, but actually they've cast someone who seems very innocent. He's such a likable guy. So we find out where he got the machine, which is that he found an old lockup. I think it's unclear how he inherited this lockup. I think it's suggested that he just breaks into it.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's this old guy who just had a whole bunch of stuff. What he said is they sorted through the stuff and they threw most of it away because it was just rubbish. But there was one tin full of foreign coins and weird bits of metal. And we find out later that all of these things are alien things.
Yeah.
So they're things that have fallen through the rift. And this man was, just collecting them. He just had a little tin to put these interesting, weird alien artifacts in.
They ask him, they're like, well, why did you have this? And he's like, oh, well, I thought, might get a bit of money for it and like cash in the attic or something. It's just like, he's like, well, you don't know, do you?
I love you don't know, do you?
You don't.
Yeah.
He's right.
You don't.
I've seen some rubbish vases on there.
And again, there is something about that kind of character, this sort of opportunist.
Yeah.
Who's just like...
He's got to get that 50 quid back for his mum, isn't he?
Yeah.
Maybe he's just really moral and he's just hoping to pay his mum back.
What it reminds me of is, did you ever watch Mine All Mine, the Russell T Davies drama?
No.
Because that's about a guy who's like got a million money-making schemes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big plot points in the first episode is that he's found this old Bakelite phone and he knows that white Bakelite is really rare and so, it's much more valuable than normal Bakelite.
Yeah.
So he's hired this man from London to come and value it. And then it turns out it is rare and it is valuable, but only by the standards of Bakelite phones. So it's like, it actually cost more to bring the man down from London to value it.
Oh,
than it was worth.
Bless
but
him.
I quite like that character type. The person who just looks at a thing and thinks, oh, this is clearly valuable, but has no way of knowing in what way it's valuable.
Yeah.
But they go back to the flat and and the rest of the stuff is just nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just ready to abandon him.
But they do find out that the thing that they had found has another half, and that he must have split it into, I presume, because he was hoping to sell them off separately, like splitting a multi-pack up or something.
Yeah. Well, clearly it's designed to come apart, and I want to give a huge shout out to the props department here because the design team, because we've been seeing this machine all along. And as soon as they say there's another half, you go, of course there is. It looks like it's half.
Of course, yeah, that makes complete sense.
So well designed. Because
shape,
it's not immediately obvious, but as soon as it's said that there's another half, it
that's a good point. That's very well done. So when they find the second half, Tosh collects it together and says it fits together like Lego. So it is obviously designed to come apart. They confiscate both halves, put back together, and they leave. And he's like, aren't you going to arrest me? And Jack's like, no, we're not the cops. We don't care. And they leave. And he's like, but I stole that. And they're like, we're robbing it back off you or something like that.
He points it out. Well, you're stealing my thing. And Jack's response is, call the cops.
Well, yeah, so call the cops. Yeah, that was it. So they leave and Gwen is the only one left with him. And then he tells Gwen that the reason he left that part separate is because he only used that side once and had a very different experience. He saw himself out there on the road, just outside his flat, dead, but looking as he does now, not old, and it terrified him, so he didn't use it again.
Yeah, so this is the idea, is that the second half of the machine seems to be for future emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is things that you will experience. So the half we've seen so far gives you old emotions imprinted on, the other will give you visions of your future. I'm going to say I am far less interested in this second half of the machine.
Yeah.
Like, because you could have a great episode from someone having visions of their future and trying to work out if they're real or not. But it's introduced so late in this episode and it's so much less interesting than what we've got that, for me, this is where the episode... It's fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but it feels a bit like there's a rush to tie everything up together.
Yeah.
I wasn't bored of the Ghost Machine yet, so it's a bit of a shame to suddenly get the plot ramp up. But, it is what it is. And so Bernie only used this machine once because he was so frightened of seeing himself dying. Again, it feels like I want to know more about that. I want to know more about how that experience changed him, and we don't really get much of that.
Particularly because we also find out that he saw the same thing under the bridge as Owen did, and Owen is completely traumatized by it. We find out that he had gone round to the people in these visions that he saw, and the first woman he went to, who he'd seen putting the body of her baby into the river, she offered him money to keep quiet. He essentially blackmailed this woman, and he's like, well, she offered, it wasn't my fault. But that means that, like, he saw the same thing as Owen. He's seen some pretty traumatic things, and Owen's struggling to deal with all of this. But Bernie, credit to him, seems to have kind of managed to bounce back from these experiences pretty well. Like, he's freaked out, but he's still just living his life.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's not a lack of empathy, because you don't need empathy for the machine to work, because it makes you feel the emotions anyway. So I think Bernie's just someone who really lives in the moment, which checks out with everything we know about him.
Yeah.
That he's quite reflexive and jumps from one thing to the next. So the only thing that stayed with him and traumatized him is this vision of his own death, which that has really freaked him out.
Yeah.
Which, again, makes sense if you live in the moment. The past doesn't really bother you, but the future might.
But yeah, he's a really interesting character. So they're leaving Bernie's flat, and Gwen tells him not to worry and that she's going to be back, because I think she really feels for him and his fear, and she commits to coming back to kind of understand what's going on and try and help him. As she's leaving, this second half of the machine does the light up beepy thing again, and it must have something that prompts you to press the button against your usual like sensibilities. So she presses the button and she goes into a similar kind of vision to what Bernie saw. In this vision, her hands are covered in blood and she only sees herself, and she says, I couldn't stop him, Owen had the knife, or something to that effect. She comes out of it and looks at Owen, who obviously has no idea about what she's just seen, and is very scared of him. Like, obviously she can understand that clearly it looks like he's killed someone, and she doesn't know the truth behind that. So they go back to the hub, and Gwen has told Jack about this. Jack says that is one of many possible futures. All this future predicting stuff is never definite, and you don't need to worry about that happening. Gwen is like, that would be useful information for Bernie, so her plan is to head back and reassure him of that. Meanwhile, something that I thought was nice, that we don't get a lot of in later episodes, meanwhile, Tosh and Owen are just out having a pint. And it's really nice. They're just talking about the stuff they've experienced at work, because this vibe that we get from them a lot is that they see all this traumatic stuff. They do have their friendships in work, and it's really nice, but when they shut off for the day, they just go home and they've got to kind of emotionally process all this stuff on their own. But this is a really nice scene where Owen admits to Tosh that he had secretly gone to visit Ed Morgan, and that's why he saw Bernie. And she's like, oh, don't let Jack find out, you'll get in trouble. And they're just chatting like work colleagues. And supporting each other and having a drink together. And it was just really, really nice to see that kind of, that social time.
Yeah. It's and especially between Tosh and Owen, who the risk with Tosh and Owen is that they're going to be on the outside of it, because there's a lot of focus on Gwen's relationship to each person individually. And Jack is is deliberately a mystery, so he's almost interesting by default.
Yeah.
The risk is that the others can slip through the cracks a little bit. So yeah, I really, really liked this. And I liked that they're not the newbies, but they're not the boss either.
Yeah.
They're really just living a life. They have these jobs. Tosh is, scandalized that Owen has gone off to threaten Ed. That's not by the book. Yeah. And, Owen knows that she's not going to go and dob him in.
Yeah, exactly. Which is another reason I liked it, that like that setup alone gives us the information that they regularly do this. They regularly hang out and have these chats. Like, Owen doesn't even give it a second thought when he tells her about what he did, because they have that friendship, they have that trust, and they have that thing of looking out for each other against Jack, who is just their boss at this point in particular. I think Tosh initiates the conversation, doesn't she? She says about the research she did about Ed Morgan, and that's what prompts Owen to do it, but with no hesitation. So it's just nice to see them chatting more about the way that they feel about it than furthering the investigation. And this is when Owen tells Tosh that when he went to visit Ed, he said, you'll get nothing from me, I've told you before. So they realise that because of what Bernie said, having seen that vision before, Bernie must have gone to Ed's house with the same blackmail plan as he had ended up getting with that other woman. With that information, the two of them head back to the hub and let Jack know about this, which is another Torchwood moment, because in doing that, Owen himself has to confess that he went to see Ed Morgan and that's what was said, and as far as we're concerned, receives no punishment whatsoever for going rogue and threatening an old man. So that's my nomination of the Torchwood moment of the week.
Yeah, good point. So now we're up to the final confrontation, I think.
Yeah, so their intention is to go back to Bernie, angry at him that he blackmailed this guy, because that's relevant to the machine and what it does and its use and stuff. I think that's their intention. Tosh sees on the CCTV that Ed Morgan is breaking his several-decade trend of not leaving the house, and he's walking through the streets towards Bernie's flat, where Gwen is, because as promised, she's returned to make sure that he's okay and explain to him that it's one of many possible futures.
It's all very actiony and plotty, and I don't mind admitting, I didn't necessarily follow the logic very well, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because really it's about the emotional content. It's about Gwen going to put her arm around the shoulder of Bernie while the others... Here's a Torchwood moment, right? They have the drug retcon. Why didn't they give it to Bernie?
That's what I thought. But then again, we don't know how long he's had this machine for. And then 2, he's not a threat. No one's going to believe him. Everyone hates him and thinks he lies anyway.
True, yeah.
You know, that was my assumption of it.
Fair enough, yeah.
So at this point, Ed Morgan is heading to Bernie's house because he is worried about more blackmail. He's worried about the truth of his history getting out and he wants to kill him, basically. Gwen is there and sees Ed Morgan outside, and she realizes that the prediction the machine gave Bernie of his death might actually come true, and they start to panic a bit. Jack and Owen are in pursuit. They get there pretty much at the same time, right? Bernie goes outside, sees that Ed Morgan is there. Gwen goes out to try and calm things down and defend him, and we get a speech from Ed about how he knew that someone would catch up with him eventually. He's always felt that when he looks in people's eyes, they know about his history, and this has obviously bothered him his entire life. Good. He's threatening Bernie, and Bernie's scared, and they're pretty much stuck with this guy at knife point. But luckily, Jack and Owen have caught up and are sneaking up behind him, and they manage to catch him and get the knife off him quickly so that no one gets hurt. But Owen, so overcome with rage about what he's witnessed and about what this guy did, Owen threatens him with the knife and puts it against his face in the exact same way he saw Ed do to Lizzie, with references about what happened. And for a second, we think that Gwen's vision is going to come true because what she said was Owen had the knife, and it looks like Owen's about to stab this guy. But Jack yells at him, he stops, he puts his hand back, and Gwen takes the knife off of him. Yeah,
so Gwen ends up with the knife, and... Okay, so my understanding is that what happens here is that Ed realises that now that the cat's out of the bag, we know he's a paranoid man. As far as he's concerned, people are going to keep coming to find him for the rest of his life. He'll never be safe again.
Yeah.
And we know that this is a man who's tried to take his own life a few times, and here he finally sees... First of all, that he sees no way out, and secondly, he just sees Gwen standing there with the knife. So he pushes himself onto the knife to take his own life.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense in which the prophecy has come true because Gwen has the knife and now she's covered in blood.
Yeah, he walked into it, but Gwen has killed him.
Yeah.
And her prediction has come true. At least Bernie's safe.
Yeah.
He's the civilian.
Yeah. I think that's really important because otherwise this would all feel a bit pointless, I suppose. I think it's important that Bernie's safe. I could have done with more emphasis on Bernie's survival, actually.
Yeah.
I could have done with a little speech at the end where Jack says, because he does tell Gwen at the end, look, you didn't kill Ed. He wanted to take his own life. That's not on you. I felt like he could also have said, and at the end of the day, you saved the life of someone who was going to die. If you'd done nothing, then you wouldn't have died. Actually, here's a quick moment. I don't want to put too much guilt on Gwen, but I think I have to say another nomination for a Torchwood moment this week is that when Gwen is given the knife, she holds it pointing outwards. I mean, she's a police officer. Like, all right, she couldn't have known what Ed was going to do, but he shouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah. But also, she's police trained. And yes, this is a scary situation if you think that your new co-worker is going to be responsible for someone's death right now. But surely she's been around at least minor weapons before. Yeah. And she's been in high tension situations. She's not going to have a weapon and be like, I got it. Don't worry, everyone. Don't worry. She's going to be like, okay, good. Put that down. Let's get him arrested or safe or whatever. But what I did like, actually, so after Gwen basically kills this man, And he's on the floor. Owen completely snaps out of his weird obsession and goes back into doctor mode. And immediately tries CPR on him, which is like, should be expected from him, but it is also nice to remind us that Owen is there for a reason and has a skill.
Yeah.
Even though he can push himself too far and he was very unprofessional, but he comes back round and tries to save this man's life because he recognises what's going on.
Yeah.
Although, I was thinking, he was like, oh, he's arresting, as it is his heart stopping. Like, he's just been stabbed. I'm not an expert, but should you try and stop the bleeding?
I know that the big thing with a stabbing is that if you've been stabbed, you should leave the knife in.
Yeah.
Whereas I think he pulls himself off the knife. Does he? I can't remember.
Yeah.
So I think he does. So
it's definitely not in him.
He's gonna die fast. Yeah, that it does feel like it's the bleeding out. That's what's gonna kill him.
Exactly. So after this incident, they head back to the hub. Gwen is clearly traumatized. She's got a little blankie around her. And they're trying to reassure her. A funny moment from Owen. He's obviously like, he's not trying to hurt Gwen's feelings, but out loud, he's reassuring himself. He's like, I know I messed up and I know I was an idiot, but I didn't kill him. Like I could have killed him, but I didn't. And Gwen's like, no, I did. And it's just like, he just no consideration for the fact that he's like, well, I didn't kill him. Bless her. One's completely unrelated thing that I noticed that I just thought was quite cute was the set. So a lot of Torchwood that I've watched has been online, so the quality's not great. But now that it's on iPlayer at the moment, I'm watching the full HD ones again. And in the background, behind Jack, there's a little coughs and sneezes spread diseases, like a proper retro sign.
That's fun.
That's topical. We're still in lockdown. But it was also nice, just a nice little touch, the idea that Jack has potentially dressed the Torchwood hub with just things he's collected over the years. Yeah. But I just really liked it, and I thought that it was very on theme. Yeah,
it's very, very... we've talked before about how great a set it is, but we haven't talked about the set dressing, you're right. There's loads of really characterful stuff in terms of what people have been given.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is really underappreciated in television, is when you character a person, it's not just the writer coming up with a character. It's not just the actor bringing life to those words and finding a person within that. It's everyone. We talked before about the way costume makes us think more about who a person is. The way the set design works. You've got so many different eyes on the same characters bringing that vision to life. And yeah, I think the Torchwood Hub is really... It's almost like a Where's Wally picture. There's so much stuff that if you pause it, there's some really fun stuff to spot.
Yeah, it shows how long Torchwood has been there for, and it kind of was just a reminder to me of like what Jack will have been through and all the things that Torchwood will have withstood throughout history. Yeah, it was a little note to it. So at sunrise, because we assume that they've just been sat there all night chatting and then the others have gone home, Jack takes Gwen just for a little walk out, and they're looking out at the bay as the sun is rising. He's still trying to reassure her. And that's where he just puts her arm around her and she leans on him in a way that's complete just friendship and comfort that's really nice. There's no confusion, there's no nothing. And sure, she's just accidentally killed someone. She's probably traumatized. So even if there was a flirting aspect to it, that wouldn't be there now. Yeah. But that's the version of Jack and Gwen that is the most comfortable.
Yeah.
Like I don't like this mixing and going back and forth. So that was nice to see the conclusion at the end that they're just hanging out and he's looking after her. Also, in this one, as I've mentioned to you before, one of my favourite things to watch is Eve Miles's hair billowing around in the wind in every scene, because she's the only one who has her hair down and it's long enough for that to happen. And this is a great one where they're talking about stuff and it's just like over the top of her like this. And the editors have tried their best to just cut as soon as it does it, but there's no hope. Stop putting her at the bay. Yeah. Stop putting her out on the waterfront. It doesn't work. But I love it. It's my favourite thing to see.
I think I'm being harder on this episode than the other two because I think this episode is so good.
You can do better.
Yeah, the end. So the ending I find, like, it's nice and it's a nice character moment, but it's sort of, the story you're telling is so big, it's almost too easy that Ed just kills himself. So Torchwood never has to decide what to do with this man. Mm-hmm. And that's because we've run out of time in the episode and we have to wrap it up.
Yeah. Each writer probably felt quite a lot of pressure to contain their story to one episode.
Yeah, that's a huge issue next week, actually. And actually, I think we probably we're not considerate enough of how incredibly difficult it is to write television like this. Where...
Yeah, self-contained, but still relevant to each thing.
Because other than the Torchwood team and the Torchwood Hub, you have to create every new character and give them a beginning, middle, and end every episode.
Yeah.
You have to come up with a new alien concept and set all that up. Mm-hmm. And so here, it's not surprising that it feels a little rushed at the end, but I think it asks questions that it doesn't have enough minutes of television to get into. And I suppose sometimes it's a good thing to be left wanting more, but in some ways it felt a bit unsatisfying as an ending.
Yeah, I get that. Oh, also, they're just putting it in Yanto's box. Yanto's little box of spooky things. Yeah. Come on now. Disorganized.
I quite like the idea that the box of spooky things just has one thing per episode. And like...
yeah, true.
Like, if this was American television and they had loads more episodes to fill, you just know there'd be a clip show where it's just Yanto going through things and going, hey, remember the time when we used the ghost machine? And there'd be clips of this episode.
Oh, yeah. Alas. So that's us then, isn't it?
So that's the ghost machine.
So we need to pick our Torchwood moment of this episode. Our contenders are the sexy gun training session, Gwen's theft of an alien artifact despite seeing the consequences of theft of alien artifacts from Torchwood very recently, Owen going rogue, threatening an old man who they're supposed to have no involvement with from that point, and not being punished for it in the slightest. And Gwen killing someone because she can't hold a knife safely.
Oh, man. We've got some great contenders.
It's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. Are you leaning towards one?
I think it's either Gwen stealing the ghost machine or Owen going rogue and receiving no punishment. I
think it's Gwen stealing the ghost machine.
Because that's the thing that makes these so funny as well, that Gwen's theft is the exact same thing that we saw the first time, that they received no punishment for. Yeah. Maybe if there was punishment from their boss, they wouldn't be doing this. Yeah. He needs to be harder on them. And
also, there's just no major benefit. The benefit of her stealing alien technology from work is that it's slightly easier to remember that she loves her boyfriend than if she just had to think about nice memories.
Just had to think. Do you know what I find would be the best way to connect with a partner and to solidify how you feel about them is to have a nice little chat with them and reminisce about your memories together. There's nothing stopping her from doing that. Reese is right there.
Yeah, that's good homework for anyone watching this, is pick someone in your life who's important to you. That doesn't have to be your partner. It can be a friend or a relative. And just ask them what nice times you've had together. And you will experience what it's like to own illegal alien technology.
And you will also already have better decision-making, better empathy than the person who's supposed to be the most empathetic character in the show. And by having a chat with your mate, you can exceed even Gwen's abilities to connect with people. So... if nothing else, take that with you.
This has been brilliant.
Yeah.
What a fun episode. Next week.
Next week.
I'm going to do a quick little introductory bit of context for next week before we get there. Okay. For anyone who's watching along with us. Because the thing that's really key about Torchwood is that this first series was made really, really fast.
Okay.
If I remember rightly, the gap between the first script being completed and the final episode being filmed is only 9 months long. So every other writer other than Russell T Davies had less than 9 months. Most of them had way less than 9 months to get an episode written because it needed to be made straight away really fast.
Yeah.
So that's why it's amazing to me that The Ghost Machine is even half decent. The fact that it's good is almost incredible because it was made so fast. Not every episode necessarily transcends this limitation because... sometimes an episode had to be filmed because it was the only one that was ready. So, episode 4 of Torchwood was meant to be episode 10.
Oh, whoa! And he was meant to have been doing that the whole time. That would be so exciting.
Right?
Oh, man. So, that's such a shame.
I think that's a good way.
Because that would have transformed everything about the dynamic within the team.
So I think it's good to go into this episode trying to put yourself in a frame of mind of, don't think that we've only known these characters for 3 weeks because we were meant to have spent so much time with them, seen so many adventures and stories, but because Chris Chibnall writes quicker than any other writer on the planet, it seems, his was the only script ready to go, and so
that's so interesting.
But also, he obviously thought he had more time to work on it as well, so it's also probably quite underdeveloped. But
the way that I would set people up for the next episode, because again, the key point of it is something that I'm like, I want to say it, and then I'm like, oh, is that a spoiler? And then I remember the title of the episode. So episode 4 of series 1 is called Cyberwoman. My thing to set people up for this is, have you ever been watching Doctor Who and you've been looking at the Cybermen and you've thought, oh, these are a good monster, but I wish they were sexy. And that's your setup for episode 4.
Amazing.
And on that note, thank you very much for joining us again on our third installment of this Torchwood rewatch. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as we did, because the quality does go up slightly, ready to dip back down again.
You should join us on Twitter.
You should. And we have a YouTube channel, which may be where you're watching this. If you're watching this, hello. If you're not, then hello. And yeah. Keep up to date with all of this nonsense.
Tell people about this podcast, please, because that's how we find new listeners. If you know someone who might be into this.
And if not, we'll chat to you next time.
Yeah, see you soon. Ta-ra.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.